Hey, I heard that Utah is considering returning to gold and silver coins.
Yes, as far as I know, their Senate passed the legislation. I don't think it's gone to their House yet,
Yeah,
or maybe it has. Maybe it has.
I'm not sure. It says it's been nearly 80 years since the U.S. stopped using the gold coins as legal currency, and nearly 40 years since the world abandoned the gold standard. So I guess the entire world abandoned the gold standard, right? And that's
Right.
mostly because what the Rothschilds have all the gold and they won't share. You see, but the precious metal could be making a comeback in the United States. I'm not sure how. How would you go about putting your state onto a gold standard when really you don't have any, right? So it says that
Right.
the Utah House, yeah, it passed in the Utah House. It still has to go through the Senate yet.
Okay.
Incredible. I'd like to see it. I want to see what happens with it. The other thing that I find curious and interesting is state banks and how they can operate outside of the Federal Reserve. And they don't get into borrowing money from the local reserve bank that then filters to the Fed Reserve. They avoid that whole process by having their own state bank that they do
Yeah.
business with. Why? And it appears to be successful, if I'm not mistaken. I think there's one state that has its own
Mm.
bank. It might be more, but I know of one state that does. I believe it's North Dakota, and they're not in debt. They're one of the 5 states that is not in debt. Out of the
Imagine
50,
that.
you got 45 that have budget shortfalls, and you only have 5 that don't. And I think they're one of them. Why aren't the rest of the states going, wait a second, we need to get in on some of this? This apparently works.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. It's a good question. And this reminds me. Did you see Neil Fox's uh, newscast today, or he released? Apparently, there's a class action suit being filed against the Federal Reserve, and you know that Neil had that song "F the Fed," and he's remastered it, remixed it. So now the song is "Sue the Fed." So there is a class action lawsuit being filed against the Federal Reserve that has a theme song.
See, I think that works. I'd like to see someone go after the Fed. I don't know what kind of success they're going to have because even Congress cannot make the Fed do anything. So, what's the Supreme Court going to do? What is a court case going to do? If Congress can't make you do it, how's the Supreme Court going to do it?
Give me control of our nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws.
And that's exactly right. Someone's got control over the money. We don't know who owns that Fed Reserve. It's a privately held company, so someone or some entity, some group owns this thing, and it's not just ours. There's a Federal Reserve system in every corner of the world, and you've got what I believe there's 7 different reserve systems in the world. I think you've got what you
Right.
got 2 that operate in Europe. There's one in Australia. I think there's 2 that work in the Far East. You have one in South America, and you have ours here. So there's a number of them throughout the world. I think they're probably all owned by the same group. So you probably have this small group, this small conglomerate of people who own these things, and at the end of the day, they're the ones who are reaping the benefit of for us for all of our taxes.
Yeah.
And I think
Yep.
that's just incredible. So when people talk about the New World Order and a global conspiracy, it may not be as ominous as what they may think it to be. That we're all going to be enslaved and encamped with tattoos on our arms and stuff. It may not be that drastic, but the thought that there's a small group of people who own these Federal Reserve banks, these Federal Reserve systems, and they're the ones who are reaping in all this money. What can you do with all of that wealth? You,
Yeah.
you can do anything you want. So the potential is there. So when they come around with their conspiracy theories, I like to listen to it, but I take a grain of salt with it. But you pay attention to what they say because there's a lot of truth, there's a lot of facts, and then you have the conjecture, their
Yep.
opinion that's formed based upon the facts. But
Yep.
pay attention to the facts.
Yep, you only go so far. This reminds me. This is my new favorite quote, or my favorite quote of the week. I should put it that way. And it's the people who own this country call it American and the American dream for a reason. You have to be asleep to believe it.
Ooh.
George Carlin.
Yeah, I miss George Carlin. Miss George.
So
George was an interesting piece of work, right?
yeah, no, but when he was right, I mean, he had, we talk about people who have that truthiness. They have that sense of truthiness. Like Bob Dylan's songs had that sense of truthiness to them.
Hmm.
George Carlin, he spoke truth. When he's in his humor, when he said things, I mean, it might have been blue, it might have been offensive,
Oh
but
yeah.
you couldn't look at him and say, no, you're wrong. You're wrong, George. That's wrong.
He had great observations about the human condition, and he made it humorous while pointing out the obvious facts. And he found the humor in what is obvious right in front of us,
Yeah.
and what we refuse to see or refuse to acknowledge. You're standing in front of a tree, yet you refuse to acknowledge that you're standing in front of a tree. To him, that was hilarious.